friends, welcome back to my channel. Apologies if you can hear any background noise. I'm filming during a storm and there is literally nothing I can do about that. So yeah, sorry if it's a bit windy and rainy outside. But if you're new here, hi, my name is Becky. I have had type 1 diabetes for 17 years now, and last year, after 16 years on good old injections, I finally switched over to using an insulin pump. So as you can tell from the title, today's video is going to be all about my favourite things about being on an insulin pump. This isn't going to be like a pros and cons, because I'm going to be doing a video soon comparing multiple daily injections to insulin pumps, and obviously that will include a lot of pros and cons of each method. But I just wanted to share now kind of the top 5 things I've been loving about being on an insulin pump since I have found a pump and a routine that works for me. The very first thing that I have to mention is, of course, temporary basal rates. I love using temporary basal rates. I use them several times a day. If you're unsure what a temporary basal rate is, it kind of does what it says on the tin. It's essentially where you have your normal basal profile and you can increase that or decrease that by a certain percentage over a time frame that you decide. This is so useful for things like exercise, going on walks. I use this all the time for evening walks and stuff like that, especially if something is spontaneous and you haven't taken into account extra activity into your previous bolus dose. You can then turn on like a 0% or a 50% temporary basal, and so you can keep the insulin back that way. Also using it for things like high stress situations. So when I'm doing a presentation at work, I know my blood sugars are going to go up, and rather than have a extra bolus for that, I prefer to have a temporary basal so it's not such a sudden drop, and it tends to keep me flatter, especially if it's a long hour-long presentation. I don't want to be risking going hypo by having an extra bolus, so I'll have a temporary basal. And also stuff like bringing down highs faster. I know you shouldn't have too much extra insulin all at once because you don't want to risk having a rebound hypo, but if I'm really high, for example, if for some reason I've had a vent cannula and I haven't been getting my insulin in, or if I forgot to give an insulin dose or something like that, and I'm really high as well as my bolus, I'll then normally run like a 150% temp basal for about an hour or so, and that just helps bring down the high a lot quicker. So having those temporary basals where you can pick a small period of time in the day or a small event in the day where it helps to have extra background insulin going on, but you don't want to have to change your whole 12 hours or 24 hours depending on if you're on Levemir or Lantus or Tresiba or whatever you're on. The second thing I love about being on an insulin pump that has taken so much work away from me is the inbuilt bolus calculator. I love this, and some like blood testing kits and stuff will have that inbuilt bolus calculator on, but if you're using a CGM, you're not going to have that, especially not on the Libra anyway. That's the system that I use, and there's no bolus calculator on there. So having a bolus calculator on the pump is so useful because I don't have to do any maths. The only maths that I'm doing is calculating the carbs in my meal, and then I'm scanning my Libra, see what my blood sugar is, put the 2 numbers into my pump, and it calculates it all for me, which is not only takes a lot of work off of me, but also it allows the calculation to be so much more precise, because it can take into account if you're only, for example, 0.2 above target. It will take that into account and give you like a micro adjustment for that, and it can also do a much more accurate calculation based on insulin on board. For me, when I was doing pens, I would like think, okay, roughly how many units have I had in the last 3 hours, and what percent of that do I think will still be going on, whereas the bolus calculator on the pump takes into account all of the bolus doses that you've done, and will take it all into account and provide a really precise correction based on, or like alteration to the dose based on your insulin on board. And it also knows your carb ratio, so I don't even have to remember what my correction factor is or what my insulin to carb ratio is at each point of the day, because my pump remembers it. I literally just plug in carbs, blood sugar, and go, and it's amazing. I have no information in my head anymore. I'm gonna be real, like it's all in the pump. The third feature I absolutely love about being on a pump is having the pre-programmed basal rate profiles. Again, if you're not sure what this means, essentially you can have different profiles logged on your pump which will give you different amounts of basal depending on what type of day it is. For example, so I have a training day profile, rest day, one for my period when my blood sugars are really uncooperative, and one for when I'm ill. So as soon as you kind of, maybe one of these things happens unexpectedly, you get your period when you're not expecting to, or you get ill unexpectedly, you don't even have to think about, okay, what do I need to do now? You just have to click the switch on the pump to say, deliver this profile, and it will automatically change, and you don't have to wait for your next injection to be able to make that change to your basal rate. You can change your profile at any point of the day. So if you start the day feeling completely healthy, and then by lunchtime you've got a cold and your blood sugars are acting up, at midday or at lunchtime when you notice that, you can change over profiles, and it's just so useful to have those in place for different types of days, so you never have to think about it again. It's just you then plugging in the numbers into your pump and it doing what you need to do. I'm also on the T-Slim pump. I used to be on the Roche Solo, which is very different, but on the T-Slim, for each profile you can alter not only your basal rate, but each profile you can also change your correction factor, your insulin to carb ratio, and your target blood sugar. So for example, on my rest day profile, not only is my basal rate a little bit higher and I have a little more insulin because of the lack of activity, I also have some of my insulin to carb ratios are a bit higher, especially for example in the morning. I always train after breakfast, and so on a training day my insulin to carb ratio for a breakfast time frame, not very much insulin at all, whereas on a rest day it's a much higher bolus for that breakfast because I'm not doing any activity to help those carbs kind of get absorbed. So being able to customize not only the basal rate but also the insulin to carb ratio, correction factor, all of that stuff for each different profile just means for each type of day you can really closely mimic what your pancreas would be doing for you anyway, if you weren't diabetic, which is obviously not only a lot better for your diabetes management, but also a lot better for your mental health, because you don't have to think about so many different factors. You just program them in once and then off you go. The third thing that is amazing about being on an insulin pump, just a quick win, is that I don't have to wake up at the same time every day to do my basal injection, because I'm not injecting my basal. The basal is going constantly via the pump. You keep it on obviously 24 hours a day unless you're showering or something, and so it doesn't matter if you have a lie-in on a Sunday, you're not going to go high because your insulin is already being delivered even while you're asleep. And I just love that. I used to be so scared about sleeping in because I knew I would wake up with a high blood sugar, so that is amazing. The next thing that I find amazing about being on the insulin pump is just how precise you can get your insulin doses, both your basal and your bolus. So obviously it completely depends on which pump you're on. I am on the T-Slim, and I'm going to be doing a full review of the T-Slim, so all of the actual specs and stuff will be in that, but I can change my basal to the nearest 0.1 unit per hour. Yes, 0.1 unit per hour, and the bolus, depending on the kind of final amount and where the numbers end up to, can be as close to the nearest 0.001 units, which is a tiny increment of insulin that the pump can deliver compared to pens. The closest you can get is half a unit for your basal or your bolus, which is just so useful, especially if you're someone who is really sensitive to insulin and you only need really small amounts anyway, or just for particular times of day when you might be more insulin sensitive. For example, straight after exercise, you might, for example, have half a unit would send you hypo, but you just want a little bit to keep you kind of precisely in range. You could deliver, say, 0.15 units, and that will keep you perfect and steady depending on your insulin sensitivity levels. So having it be that precise, again, is just another element where you can get it closer and closer to what your pancreas would be doing if it was working properly. Those are my top 5 favourite things about being on an insulin pump. Let me know yours down below if you think I've missed any of the key insulin pump perks. Obviously, a big disclaimer after having said all of this stuff I love, there are definitely difficulties to having an insulin pump. You'll definitely know that if you've seen my video where I said about the reality of switching from multiple daily injections to an insulin pump, and if you've seen any of my videos on my old insulin pump, it was a very faulty pump, it didn't work for me at all, and there are definitely other considerations that make life with an insulin pump more difficult compared to injections, and I'll be sharing that of course in my injections versus pump video. But for now, if you're considering getting an insulin pump or just wanted to hear a little bit more about the experience, I hope this has given you some insight into the cool diabetes things that you can do using an insulin pump. So yeah, I'll see you guys in my next video and have a lovely day. Bye!